Greetings YouTube. I was actually going to put on a specific t-shirt for today's video, but with Mandarin here and knowing how popular she is, I figured I'd just shoot the video like this, which is why I don't have my my secondary light on, because I don't want to disturb the cat. So someone contacted me recently and asked me a question about vampires. And the question was skewed specifically to their campaign, but it got me thinking about vampires in D&D in general, because the person's question dealt with vampires in a fantasy setting that has an alignment system. And when you say alignment system, you're normally talking about D&D. So you've got your, neutral, chaotic, and lawful versions of good, evil, and neutrality. Chaotic, lawful, and true neutral. Yeah, I get that right. Sorry. I've only been up for about an hour, so I'm not totally awake yet. And it got me thinking. And the question he had really broke down into a number of different questions in my head. For example, what types of creatures can a vampire gain sustenance from? And we're going to use a human vampire here as an example, because most of the players of these characters will be human. And I feel that a human vampire could gain the best sustenance from humans. But they should also be able to get sustenance just as effectively from members of half races. So half orcs and half elves, for example, would provide essentially the same food quantity or quality as a human would. And after that, the quality begins to drop down as you go further away from that. So elves and orcs would be a little less. The demi-human races, like dwarves, gnomes, halflings, they would be less effective than the elves and orcs. And then you went in the other direction, and you start getting to the more bestial, goblin-like races, like hobgoblins, bugbears, and goblins themselves, and you get a significant drop-off. So maybe goblins are considered, one step above animals as far as a human vampire would be concerned. But essentially, all of the mammalian humanoid races would count as far as the food requirements of a human vampire. And you'd skew these views for a different race. An orc vampire would, of course, prefer orcs, but would be able to easily sustain themselves off the half-orcs, and then humans next, and, get the point. Maybe they consider elves to be a delicacy. So that was kind of one question. What can they sustain themselves on? But another question was, is feeding on a sapient entity, such as another humanoid, evil? Now, he was putting forth the idea that in his campaign, his ideas about vampires, the process of feeding is painful and damaging. That the type of vampire that is the seductive vampire is very rare, and that is exclusive to the older, more powerful vampires. But I feel that in my view of vampires, that the standard vampire can be a seducer, and their minions would be the less nuanced feeders, if you will, that are a little more savage. And as they gain some power and eventually become a full-blood vampire in their own right, they also could become seducers. And if it's a seduction style vampire, I would say that is could be at least truly neutral. So you could have a vampire that was true neutral, lawful neutral, or chaotic neutral. Of course, also all the evil varieties. But you could never have a vampire that was truly good if you're having to sustain yourself off the blood of a fellow sapient being. That there is something inherently violating. That's the word I'm looking for. Violating about the process. Even though the seducer is going to be able to probably do the feeding process, not have it be overly painful, and probably heal the wound up when they're done, the classic vampire trope that was used so many times in films, because it is a stand-in for sexuality. the whole idea of penetration and blood. It's all about a stand-in for sexual penetration and sexual intercourse. Always has been, at least tend to be in the European style of vampires. There are many different types of vampires. My favorite being an African variety that look perfectly normal in the daytime, and they take off their skin and walk around with their muscles and organs exposed at night when they hunt. That's just cool. But if they're the more savage feeder style, where at best they're harming, if not killing, the creature, the person that they're feeding off of, I would say that the best they could hope for would be chaotic neutral. They're very, very self-centered. That's the best you could hope for as far as alignment is concerned, because they're completely, it's all about me. It isn't necessarily evil, but it's all very self-centered. As the old Al Franken line is, what have you done today for Al Franken? Well, that's kind of the attitude that these vampires have. And then, of course, as they're more likely to be evil, they're that feeding variety, particularly if they're feeders that kill. If you're killing a sapient being for the purposes of food, that's an evil act. If you happen to feed upon a sapient being that was killed for another reason, I don't consider that to be an evil act. For example, if you are consuming the corpse, or a non-vampire is consuming the corpse of someone that they have killed in battle, but the killing them was not for food, was not the purpose, I don't think that has any form of moral judgment whatsoever. Meat's meat. That's just me. Then again, I don't consider raising zombies and skeletons to be an evil act. I consider it simply animating a corpse. I know that puts me on the outlier end of the what is evil or not for necromancy. But these are some of the questions that this person has got me thinking about when it comes to vampires. Is the act evil? What can they consume? And then again, I'm talking about the classic D&D style of vampire. This is not the Vampire Masquerade or Vampire Requiem or Monty Cook's World of Darkness single volume game, which I think was very well done. I really quite like that particular book. Even though essentially all the classes are race by class, just because those creatures are so powerful. But I'm looking forward to hearing people, how do you interpret the classic D&D style vampire? What can they feed off of? Is what they are doing evil? If it isn't always evil, can they be some form of neutrality? And if so, which ones are you comfortable with? And if you have a less traditional take on vampires in a D&D, or at least a kind of high fantasy game like D&D is, could be HARP or BRP or Savage Worlds or what have you. How do you interpret vampires and how they fit into the world? Or even if you're using, say, Radiance, which actually has a class of vampirism, which I thought was rather well done, and they can be the best they can be in Radiance is neutral. It cannot be good. So there's that. So I'm looking forward to your answers.